What if I told you that while America was carrying out a high-risk airstrike on Iran's nuclear program, China was sitting nearby, silently collecting every possible detail of that mission? No weapons fired, no headlines, just silent intelligence gathering, right off the coast. And the real twist? This wasn't about Iran. Not really. It was about preparing for something bigger, far more dangerous, thousands of miles away, in the South China Sea. Because that's where the real game is being played. And while the world focuses on airstrikes and sanctions, China is studying, adapting, and waiting. Let's break this down, because this story isn't just about one spy ship or one operation. It's about how modern warfare and global dominance are evolving in real time. On June 23rd, just before dawn, the United States executed a precision airstrike on 3 key Iranian nuclear facilities: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. These weren't symbolic targets. These are core parts of Iran's nuclear fuel cycle, underground, fortified, and spread across the country. The strike, known as Operation Midnight Hammer, involved stealth bombers, the B-2 Spirit, backed by extensive electronic warfare support and real-time satellite coordination. These bombers are practically invisible to radar, capable of dropping heavy ordnance from high altitudes, and designed to strike without warning. But this mission wasn't carried out in a vacuum. While the US focused on Iran, a Chinese surveillance vessel, outfitted with advanced radar and signal interception systems, was quietly operating in the Persian Gulf. And that changes everything, because China wasn't just watching, it was learning, studying American stealth signatures, monitoring US Navy logistics, collecting data on radar jamming frequencies, timing every move. And now, that information is heading straight back to Beijing. Let's ask a simple question. Why would China place an intelligence ship in the Persian Gulf during a US military operation halfway around the world? Part of the answer is oil. China imports over 40% of its crude from the Middle East, including from Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. Any military conflict that threatens that supply is of direct national interest. But the deeper reason is strategy. China is obsessed with how the US wages modern war, because if a conflict ever breaks out in the Indo-Pacific, particularly over Taiwan or in the South China Sea, Beijing will need to defend itself against the exact same type of US strike: fast, invisible, and overwhelming. Watching a real B-2 strike in action, with real weapons, real jamming, and real carrier groups, gives China an invaluable, real-world playbook. Simulations can't teach what a live mission reveals. And let's be clear, China doesn't send these ships out randomly. They're deployed with a purpose: to gather insights and close the technological gap that separates Beijing from Washington. So, why does this all connect back to the South China Sea? Because that's the region where China believes it can redefine global power, and where the US intends to stop them. The South China Sea is arguably the most strategically important body of water in the world today. It's the highway for over $3 trillion in global trade every year. It's rich in oil, natural gas, and fisheries, and most importantly, it sits at the center of China's maritime expansion, the so-called Nine-Dash Line, which Beijing uses to claim nearly the entire sea as its own. This claim overlaps with the territorial waters of Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia, and it's been rejected by international courts. But China doesn't care. It's building artificial islands, militarizing reefs, and turning contested zones into fortified bases. And it's here, not the Persian Gulf, where the US and China are most likely to clash in the coming years. In response to both the Iran operation and growing tensions in the Pacific, the US Navy is shifting gears. Right now, the USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group is conducting exercises in the Western Pacific, but that's just part of the picture. Multiple destroyers that had been operating in CENTCOM, covering the Middle East, are now being repositioned toward INDOPACOM. Meanwhile, surveillance flights from Guam, Japan, and even Australia have increased over the South China Sea. And it's not just about presence, it's about posture. These forces are being retasked to prepare for scenarios that go far beyond freedom of navigation patrols. They're training for electronic warfare, submarine hunting, and rapid airstrike coordination, exactly the kind of tactics used during the Iran mission. Because if a Taiwan crisis erupts, or if China begins enforcing an air defense identification zone over the South China Sea, these assets will be on the front line. The countries bordering the South China Sea aren't just passive observers. They're preparing too. The Philippines has reopened several military bases to the US. Vietnam is quietly deepening its defense ties with Japan and India. And Indonesia has begun increasing patrols near the Natuna Islands, which are often harassed by Chinese fishing fleets backed by the PLA Navy. This isn't about trade anymore, it's about sovereignty and survival. But here's the reality. No single Southeast Asian country can stand up to China's Navy alone. They rely, sometimes reluctantly, on the US to be the balancing force. That's why every time America conducts an operation like the one in Iran, China watches carefully. It wants to know, how fast can the US strike? How accurate is their targeting? What gaps in defense did they exploit? Because in the next crisis, those lessons may be turned around and used in a battlefield far closer to home. Beijing isn't preparing for a war tomorrow, but it's preparing for a future where it can challenge the US, or deter it entirely, in the South China Sea, Taiwan Strait, and beyond. And intelligence, not bombs, is the first phase of that preparation. By positioning spy ships in key theaters like the Persian Gulf, China gets a front-row seat to how the US operates under real pressure. Every radar ping, every jamming frequency, every flight pattern, it's all data. Data that will be fed into AI systems, tested in simulations, and incorporated into China's next-generation weapons. That's the new Cold War. Not about ideology, but about information, precision, and timing. So, what began as a strike on Iran may end up influencing a future conflict in the South China Sea. The US proved it could hit hard and leave no trace. But China proved something too, that it's always watching, always learning, and always thinking ahead. The world is entering a new era of shadow wars, where one battle reveals secrets for the next. And if there's one thing we've learned, it's this. The most important moves aren't made on the battlefield. They're made by the ones who know how to read it. Enjoyed this breakdown? Hit the like button, subscribe for deep geopolitical analysis, and let us know in the comments. Is the South China Sea the world's next great conflict zone? Stay sharp. Until next time.